Hello students, I'm Siraj Khan, lecturer in English Cast. Welcome to my subject English Literature from New Classics to date. Our course code is English 242 and it's our lecture number 10. Today we are talking about Victorian period. As John Stuart Mill said, we are living in an age of transition. Thomas Carlyle says the old has passed away, but alas, the new appears not in its stead. The time is still in pangs of travail with the new. The outlines are its Queen Victoria, her reign from 1837 to 1901. The Victorian era, spanning the duration of Queen Victoria's rule from 1837 to 1901, is characterized by the expanding horizons of education and literacy, as well as by an increased desire of the people to question religion and politics. During this time period, publications such as Marx and Hegel's Communist Manifesto in 1848 and Darwin's Origin of the Species in 1859 served as catalysts for political and religious controversy. These new notions of government and science signaled a turn from the idealism of the Romantics to a more empirical worldview. The Victorian era also marks a time of great economic growth, technological discovery, and industrialization. Many writers reacted to both the wonders of this industrial revolution as well as the troubles of an industrialized society. Also, during the Victorian era, the influence of literature became more prevalent in society as reading evolved into a social pastime, indicated by the increasing literacy rate. At the era's beginning in 1837, it is estimated that approximately half of the adult male population was literate to a certain degree. Because of the new practices, compulsory education, and technological advances in printing, resulting in widely available reading materials, standard literacy was more or less universal by the end of the century. The outlines of today's lecture are, first of all, the Victorian period, followed by the Georgian period, the early Victorian period, and also the British Empire. We'll talk about Victorian novel, Victorian poetry, and Victorian drama. Victorian period started in 1837, ended in 1960, or it has been highlighted in 1901 till 1960. London became the most important city in Europe. Population of London expanded from 2 million to 6 million. Shift from ownership of land to modern urban economy. Urbanization started. Impact of industrialization is the growth in industrialization, increase in wealth, world's foremost imperial power, England emerged. Victorian people suffered from anxiety, a sense of being displaced persons in an age of technological advances. Georgian Period 1911 to 1936, a reaction against the achievements of the Victorian period. The early Victorian period 1830 to 1848. In 1830, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened, the first public railway line in the world, and by 1850, England had uh, connected major cities through railway, and by 1900 England had 15,195 lines of railway road and an underground rail system beneath London. The trend transformed England's landscape, supported the growth of commerce, and shrank the distance between cities. The Reform Bill of 1832 transformed English class structure, extended the right to vote to all males owning property. Second Reform Bill, passed in 1867, extended right to vote to working class. The time of troubles, 1830s and 1840s, unemployment went high, poverty increased, rioting, slums in large cities, working conditions for women and children were terrible. Impact on Victorian literature. The novelists of the 1840s and the 1850s responded to the industrial and political scene. Among the Victorian masters of, like when we are talking about literature, fiction and non-fiction, these were the great Whig historians Thomas Macaulay and Thomas Carlyle, the historian, social critic, and prophet whose rhetoric thundered through the age. Like influential thinkers included John Stuart Mill, the great liberal scholar and philosopher Thomas Henry Huxley, a scientist and popularizer of Darwinian theory, and John Henry Cardinal Newman, who wrote earnestly of religion, philosophy, and education. The founders of communism, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, researched and wrote their books in the free environment of England. The great art historian and critic John Ruskin also concerned himself with social and economic problems. Matthew Arnold's theories of literature and culture laid the foundations for modern literary criticism, and his poetry is also notable. This era was a great age of the English novel, realistic, thickly plotted, crowded with characters, and long it was the ideal form to describe contemporary life and to entertain the middle class. The novels of Charles Dickens, full to overflowing with drama, humor, and an endless variety of vivid characters and plot complications, nonetheless spared nothing in their portrayal of what urban life was like for all classes. William Makepeace Thackeray is best known for Vanity Fair, which wickedly satirizes hypocrisy and greed. Charles Kingsley's The Water Babies Elizabeth Gaskell, North and South, Life of Charlotte Bronte, and Benjamin Disraeli Sebel. The mid-Victorian period, a time of prosperity, a time of improvement, and it was a time of stability in a time of optimism. And it was like the society, Victorian society, was organized by that time hierarchically, while race, religion, region, and occupation were all meaningful aspects of identity and status. The main organizing principles of Victorian society were gender and class. As is suggested by the sexual double standard, gender was considered to be biologically based and to be determinative of almost every aspect of an individual's potential and character. The Victorian gender ideology was premised on the doctrine of separate spheres. This stated that men and women were different and meant for different things. Men were physically strong while women were weak. For men, sex was central, and for women, reproduction was central. Men were independent. Men were independent while women were dependent. Men belonged in the public sphere while women belonged in the private sphere. Men were meant to participate in politics and in paid work while women were meant to run households and raise families. Women were also thought to be naturally more religious and morally finer than men, who were distracted by sexual passions by which women supposedly were untroubled, while most working class families could not live out the doctrine of separate spheres because they could not survive on a single male wage. The ideology was influential across all classes. Erected to a crystal palace, erected to display the exhibits of modern industry and science. At the 1851, a great exhibition took place. One of the first buildings constructed according to modern architectural principles. Architecture flourished, the cities were flourished, the buildings were built, and that symbolized the triumphs of Victorian industry. The British Empire emerged in 1853 and 1880, large-scale immigration to British colonies. In 1857, Parliament took over the government of India and Queen Victoria became Empress of India. Many British people saw the expansion of empire as a moral responsibility, and missionaries spread Christianity in India, Asia, and Africa. Religious debates took place. Evangelical movement emphasized spiritual transformation of the individual by converging in a moral Christian life. Their view of life was identical with dissenters. The High Church emphasized the importance of tradition, ritual, and authority. The Oxford movement, led by Newman, and the Oxford movement was actually a religious movement, stood against the Catholics and Protestants. They turned. The broad church was open to modern ideas. Utilitarianism derived from the ideas of Jeremy Bentham and his disciple James Mill, the father of John Stuart Mill. Rationalist test of value, the greatest good for the greatest number. Utilitarianism failed to recognize people's spiritual. The central feature of Victorian era politics is the search for reform and improvement, including both the individual personality and society. Three powerful forces were at work. First was the rapid rise of the middle class, in large part displacing the complete control long exercised by the aristocracy. Respectability was their code. A businessman had to be trusted and must avoid reckless gambling and heavy drinking. Second, the spiritual reform closely linked to evangelical Christianity, including both the nonconformist sects such as the Methodists and especially the evangelical or low church element in the establishment Church of England, typified by Lord Shaftesbury in 1801 till 1885. It imposed fresh moralistic values on society such as Sabbath observance, responsibility, widespread charity, discipline in the home, and self examination for the smallest faults in needs of improvement. Starting with the anti slavery movement of the 1790s, the evangelical moralizers developed highly effective techniques of enchanting the moral sensibilities of all family members and reaching the public at large through intense, very well organized agitation and propaganda. They focused on exciting a personal aversion against social evils and personal misbehavior. As Briggs points out, there were as many treatises on domestic economy in mid-Victorian England as on political economy. The third effect came from the liberalism of philosophical utilitarians led by intellectuals Jeremy Bentham 1748 to 1832, James Mill 1773 1836, and his son John Stuart Mill 1806 to 1873. They were not moralists but scientific. Their movement, often called philosophic radicalism, fashioned a formula for promoting the goal of progress using scientific rationality and business-like efficiency to identify, measure, and discover solutions to social problems. The formula was an inquiry, legislation, execution, inspection, and report. In public affairs, their a leading exponent was Edwin Chadwick. Evangelicals and utilitarians shared a basic middle-class ethic of responsibility and formed a political alliance. The result was an irresistible force for reform. Challenges to religious belief, science, Huxley and Darwin's theory of the origin of species and the descent of man. These were the religious challenges to the people that they faced. As science was developed, Darwin's theory came. Higher criticism, examination of the Bible as a mere text of history, source studies, geology, astronomy. The late Victorian period, 1870 to 1901, decay of Victorian values, British imperialism, Boer War, Irish question, and Bismarck's Germany became a rival power. In United States became a rival power. But actually the Victorian period and the British imperialism's downfall, it came after the Second World War in 1945. But till that it was not exposed. An economic depression led to mass immigration, socialism, The political struggle and the paradigm shift of the world, it changed as Germany emerged. In the First World War, Germany as Hitler, they faced defeat, and in the Second World War, America, the United States, that emerged as a superpower. The 1890s breakdown of Victorian values, mode of melancholy, aesthetic movement, the beginning of the modern movement in literature. As reading became less of a privilege of the wealthy and more of a pastime of the common British citizen, publications such as periodicals flourished. These magazines provided monthly installments of news articles, satiric essays, poetry, and fiction. Their social publications enabled many authors to easily share their work with the public and helped launch the careers of prominent Victorian writers such as Dickens, Eliot, Tennyson, and the Brownings. Because literature was an accessible and pervasive uh, part of Victorian society, studying it is crucial in understanding the attitudes and concerns of the people who lived during this era. Much of the writing during this time was a reaction to the rapidly changing notions of science, morality, and society. The writers also reacted to the writings of previous generations. Charles Lando argues that the Victorians wanted to escape what they saw as the excessive subjectivity of the Romantics, while at the same time keeping their individuality, originality, and intensity, and above all, sincerity. Aubrey Birdley's drawings, prose of George Moore and Max Beerbohm, poetry of Ernest Dawson. The role of woman, the woman question. Changing conditions of women's work created by the Industrial Revolution. Class was both economic and cultural and encompassed income, occupation, education, family structure, sexual behavior, politics, and leisure activities. The working class, about 70 to 80% of the population, got its income from wages, with family incomes usually under £100 per annum. Many middle class observers thought that working class people imitated middle class people as much as they could, but they were mistaken. Working class cultures, which varied by locality and other factors, were strong, specific, and premised on their own values. The middle class, which got its income of £100 to £1,000 per annum from salaries and profit, grew rapidly during the 19th century from 15 to over 25% of the population. During the 19th century, members of the middle class were the moral leaders of society. They also achieved some political power. The very small and very wealthy upper class got its income of £1,000 per annum, or often much more, from property, rent, and interest. The upper class had titles, wealth, land, or all three owned most of the Factory Act's regulations of the conditions of labor in mines and factories. As the society was divided, was organized hierarchically, while race, religion, region, and occupation were all meaningful aspects of identity and status. The main organizing principles of Victorian society were gender and class, as is suggested by the sexual double standard. Gender was considered to be biologically based and to be determinative of almost every aspect of an individual's potential and character. Victorian gender ideology was premised on the doctrine of separate spades. They stated that men and women were different and meant for different things. The Custody Act 1839 gave a mother the right to petition the court for access to her minor children and custody of children under 7 in later 16. The Divorce and Matrimonial Causes Act established a civil divorce court. Married women's property acts were passed. Educational opportunities for women. First women's college established in 1848 in London. By the end of Victorian's reign, women could take degrees at 12 university colleges. Working conditions for women. Bad working conditions and underemployment drove thousands of women into prostitution. The only occupation at which an unmarried middle class woman could earn a living and maintain some claim to gentility was that of a governess. Victorian woman in the home. Victorian society was preoccupied with the very nature of woman. Women got their right equal to men, protected and enshrined within the home. Her role was to create a palace of peace where men could take refuge from the difficulties of modern life. Literacy, publication, and reading. By the end of the century, literacy was almost universal. Compulsory national education required to the age of 10. Due to technological advances and explosion of things to read, including newspapers, periodicals, and books, growth of the periodical novels and short fiction were published in serial form. The reading public expected literature to eliminate social problems. The Victorian novel. The Victorian era was the greatest age of the English novel, realistic, thickly plotted, crowded with characters and long. It was the ideal form to describe contemporary life and to entertain the middle class. The novels of Charles Dickens, full to overflowing with drama, humor, and an endless variety of vivid characters and plot complications, nonetheless spare nothing in their portrayal of what urban life was like for all classes. William Makepeace Thackeray is best known for Vanity Fair. Victorian novels seek to represent a large and comprehensive social world with a variety of classes. The novels were realistic. Major theme is the place of the individual in society, the aspiration, the growth, the struggle in life, achievements, and the hero or heroine for love or social position, their aspiration. The protagonist's search for fulfillment is emblematic of the human condition. For the first time, women were major writers. The Brontes, Emily Bronte's single novel Wuthering Heights is a unique masterpiece propelled by a vision of elemental passions but controlled by an uncompromising artistic scene. The fine novels of Emily's sister Charlotte Bronte, especially Jane Eyre 1847 and Villette 1853, are more rooted in convention but daring in their own ways. The novels of George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans appeared during the 1860s and 70s, a woman of great erudition and moral fervor. Eliot was concerned with uh, ethical conflicts and social problems. George Meredith produced comic novels noted for their psychological perception. Another novelist of the late 19th century was the prolific Anthony Trollope, famous for sequences of related novels that explore social, ecclesiastical, and political life in England. Victorian poetry. Prominent poet of the Victorian age was Alfred Lord Tennyson. Although romantic in subject matter, his poetry was tempered by personal melancholy in its mixture of social certitude and religious doubt. It reflected the age. The poetry of Robert Browning and his wife Elizabeth Barrett Browning was immensely popular, though Elizabeth was more venerated during their lifetimes. The poetry developed in the context of the novel. Poets sought new ways of telling stories in verse. All of the Victorian poets show the strong influence of the Romantics, but they cannot sustain the confidence the Romantics felt in the power of the imaginations. Victorian poets often rewrite Romantic poems with a sense of belatedness. Dramatic monologue, the idea of creating a lyric poem in the voice of a speaker, ironically distinct from the poet, is the great achievement of Victorian poetry. Victorian poetry is pictorial. Poets use detail to construct visual images that represent the emotion or situation the poem concerns. Conflict between private poetic self and public social role. Victorian drama. The theatre was a flourishing and popular institution during the Victorian period, and the popularity of theatre influenced other genres like Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde, transformed British theatre with their comic masterpieces. Some pictures from the Victorian period we have got here. And that's all. Thank you very much.